Where do we start as runners? To kick off our 5th season, we address this question whether you're a longtime runner or totally new to the sport. Also, close to 5,000 runners were informed mere hours before the start of their event that it was canceled. The World Athletics held the first ever road racing championships, and Hobbs Kessler's post-race reaction was priceless. And this track meet went off the rails when they found out drug testers would be making an unexpected appearance. All this and more today on A to Z Running. Welcome back to A to Z Running, where we're helping runners thrive with information and inspiration, coaching and training services, and more. And you can learn more or check out our services at AtoZrunning.com. We're also on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, all the places where people do all the things. We're probably there. Check us out. Look for A to Z Running. And welcome to Season 5. I said it in the intro, but this is Season 5, or the beginning of Season 5, on the A to Z Running podcast. And unless this is your first time, and welcome, we're glad you're here. You know that the thing we like to do the most here at A to Z Running is hear your thoughts and answer your questions. So, a note about that, to further this mission, and because this is new season, we're going to be addressing things a little bit differently in our structure here. So, namely, among the changes, we are going to answer listener questions every single episode. One or two, a handful of questions every single episode. And so that means when you submit the questions, our responses will be more immediate and timely, which is helpful, instead of at the end of the month only. And we'll be grabbing a smaller selection, but we'll be sprinkling them out more often. So I think we'll be able to get to more questions as well. At least that's the hope. That is best laid plans of mice and men. Remember, you can always submit your questions. This remains true, as it has always been, by going to atozrunning.com/question. And as it goes, as long as you submit a question by the end of the week, there's a good chance that it can make it on to the next week's episode. We always publish at the beginning of the week, so share those questions, and the answers will follow quickly, which is good. We are excited. The new format then, as you can see in that example, some slight changes. It's fairly simple. We'll begin with your questions, answer one or two about racing, training, runner life, all of the stuff. And then we'll do something helpful, which is a focused examination of a topic that we feel is helpful to runners and our efforts in the running stuff. And that's good because it has been true in the past that sometimes our topics are very broad and can cover a lot of different aspects and depths of something and can be hard to digest at times. So we're hoping that with this adjustment to our structure, that things will be a little bit easier to digest in smaller bits and chunks and bites or something like that. And then, of course, we will have the world of running as well to share a look at a handful of the latest interesting happenings in our sport. And that's nothing new. So if you're new to the podcast, that's what you can now expect here moving forward. And if you're not new to us, fairly familiar with a few small tweaks that we hope are for the best. As you know, we love interacting with you, and so let us know what you think of the format and the content as we get into these things. Share comments on the places where you're hearing this, especially like the socials, like YouTube and Instagram and that kind of stuff. We publish audio, by the way, on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music. It's like all of the main podcast platforms. You can find it. But we also then publish video on YouTube, though I wouldn't blame you if you felt it best not to subject yourself to the unsightly horrors of having to watch Zach talk. Someone recently commented that, why is it that Zach sometimes talks in the third person? I don't know particularly why. I'm sure I picked up the habit from some other thing that I read or listen to regularly enough that it rubbed off on me. I don't do it all the time, obviously. I'm doing that, first person right now. It's more a rhetorical exercise than anything else. And I don't know if it's adding value or just being annoying, but that's what it is. Okay, on that note, you can see here a bummer, a huge bummer that Andy is not with us for the launch of Season 5, but she'll be back soon, and I am just as relieved as you to know it. So let's go ahead and dive right in with our first and new segment, Your Questions. Now, answering your questions to start things off, we're going to do 2 today, and we'll try to do 2 every time. As you know, it depends on the scope of the question and may or may not always have time for both, but we'll always try to at least get 1 or 2. We'll get 1 or 2 for sure. But this first one in particular, it's valuable to do now because it's actually a follow-up to some running news we shared recently a couple weeks ago. A listener asked, how is it possible to do a 5K and 10K record in the same race? And I assume that how is it possible is a couple of different layers question. So it's a great question. In this case, not about your training endeavors, but about a thing that happened that we were reporting on. So if you recall, we shared 2 weeks ago or so that Agnes Ngetic of Kenya broke both the 5K and 10K road race records, world records, in the same race. Now, the first thing we have to share is an update to that report, which is she actually wasn't granted the records because it turns out the course was short, or at least short enough that it was not record legitimate anymore, which is a huge bummer because chances are with how well she ran, depending on how short the course was, she'd be able to accomplish something like that. And so it's unfortunate because the opportunity, whether it could have happened in the day on a legit course or not, we'll never know that moment. Hopefully she has a good day like that again and tries again. But back to the question, listener question. Okay, so yes, you can set multiple records of multiple distances in the same race. This happens actually quite a bit, not necessarily people breaking world records, but this structure. And what it is, so as you know, if you run road races especially, there's often timing mats at various points throughout the race, because then what they do is they are able to provide kind of like checkpoint results throughout the race, which, for the live tracking results, there's a lot of reasons why they do that. But as it goes, those, if they constitute certain stipulations, can be official time results for the given distance you have covered up to that point. So if you have a 5K mat in a 10K race, that 5K time is then a legitimate 5K time as well as a full 10K time for the whole race. So that's great, because then you can have situations like this where someone's running fast enough in the first half of their 10K that they could actually set a personal best or a record or something like that. Which, as it goes, in that sense, a number of you listeners have set multiple personal records in a single race, and you've shared this with us. Things like in my marathon, I set a half marathon record in the first half, and then went on to run, in my half marathon, I also set a 10K personal record. Like things like that happen a fair bit. Well, all it takes is some kind of official timing mat at those locations, and you can call that an official record, personal or otherwise. So that happens. But there's another layer to this, which is physiologically, how do these runners do that? Because isn't it understandable that someone who sets the world record in the 5K likely should be running faster than someone could run in the 10K, because we're talking about the best in the world, and this is not like a new record where things are subject to, initial stages of progress, which is not the same as years and years. Well, as that is true, it's also the case that in the highest levels of distance running, the differences between things like maximum potential in a 5K and maximum potential in a 10K are not that terribly far apart. They can be sometimes, but often are not. And so what you get, especially in less optimized events, so track is highly optimized, which means chances are this kind of thing would never happen on the track anymore. But on road racing, things are not as optimized, and it can happen a fair bit more. And one of the examples of this is with the new shoe technology, they're finding that runners are going out substantially faster in races, and they're not paying for it as much in the late stages. That doesn't mean that they're able to hold it just because they're going crazy fast and they can suddenly just continue to run that. If they fade off of that crazy fast pace, they don't fade as much as they used to, or as the energy return benefits of these shoes have seen some differences in how people have executed that approach. So yes, it can happen. It can definitely happen on the roads the most. And we do see it every now and then. So there you go. It didn't happen in this instance because of the short course, unfortunately, for Negedich, but hopefully another time. Next question here. This one's now specifically to your experiences. This is a question from Pete, longtime listener. Pete says, how does long-term running on and off training cycles, like not necessarily just consistent the whole time, how does that contribute to one's fitness in terms of the longevity? I have heard the quote, many of us have heard this, you have lots of miles in you, or like got a lot of miles in your legs, or something like that. Going into a new cycle, but does that hold weight? Does that help me? Is the question. So good, appreciate it, Pete. Good question. So the first thing to think about with this is always remember the layers involved. There are multiple layers of fitness, you could say. And so when you say, how does it contribute to fitness? We have to look at each one of them. Neuromuscular is one layer. Neuromuscular development is easily lost and easily gained. And so you can lose neuromuscular development in terms of like it starts to become less and less prominent within days. It can happen very easily, very quickly, to some degree. All of these things are in degrees, but that being the case, it's also very easy to regain neuromuscular development by doing simple, small things and doing them just a handful of times at most. And so you can lose it fast, you can gain it fast. That is not necessarily something that you see any kind of effect of, like the longevity in the sport does not necessarily translate to neuromuscular activity in the moment. So aerobic system is the next layer, and your energy system. This is a hard won and easily lost type of layer. So if neuromuscular is easily won and easily lost, aerobic is kind of in the middle. Hard won, easily lost. That doesn't mean you lose all of it very quickly, but it does mean that it starts to fade soon after levels of inactivity. And then it fades to a degree, and there's a lot of studies around this where your aerobic capacity plateaus. It has kind of like a floor. And so as long as you don't sit on that floor in zero activity for long periods of time, because then the floor will decrease again. But for instance, if you get like hurt and you have to take a couple of weeks off, a few weeks off, after a certain point in time, what you're losing stops decreasing notably. And so part of that is also you can sustain that floor with minimal levels of activity as well. And so it comes back. You gain back the losses more easily because there's not that many losses you have to gain back. And so even though it is a hard-won development, over time, and this is one of the contributions to your comment, over time, your aerobic energy system is more easily regained than it in its first initial development. So that's why we see with something like this, that's why we see like years of training matter for ultimate progress, for long-term progress. And so you can have gains in one season, but not fully realize the benefits of what you're doing until future seasons. And all of that has in part to do with your aerobic system. So yes, here's a piece of it. All the time you've spent training for years and years means that it's easier for you to gain fitness when you're training in the future. That is true, as long as the disruptions are not so extensive that you have to regain everything lost, which could happen, but almost never does, except for with people who step away from the sport for substantial periods of time. Okay, so then musculoskeletal is the third. Musculoskeletal development, then your strength and structure in your system, or rather your strength in your structure. And with this is the key to your question now, because musculoskeletal is hard won and hard lost. These things do not decrease developmentally very quickly, and also they take a long time to gain. And so your musculoskeletal has then everything to do with the time spent training is building up that capacity. And yes, now it is absolutely true that you're, quote, banking miles by the more training you do now, the better off you are down the line in the future. Very much the case as it pertains to your structural integrity and strength. Go back to the old, I don't know exactly which one of those old martial arts movies, famous movies, where he's got him slapping the water, right? And then there's another one where he's got washing the windows and like all these things, the musculoskeletal type of stuff. Fundamentally, things like the integrity of your bones in your feet, for instance, over time that continues to build and strengthen by the constant work you're doing, just hitting the ground over and over. And that is not something that develops in like weeks and months. It's something that develops in years and years. And so, and weeks and months, but it just continues over the years. So that's where you see, okay, if I've been running, training, even if it's not terribly consistent, but if I've been doing this for a decade, I'm in a better place in terms of regaining fitness or coming back from a break than if I've been doing this for 1 or 2 years. It's absolutely the case. So those of you who are new to running, there's a little bit of, if this is your first time ever thinking about running and training, and you're just starting to get into the sport, remember those layers. The time spent, it's going to take some time, and you have to be patient with it, because most of the good things you need as a runner, developmentally, physiologically, I should say, they're not going to come quickly, but they will be well worth it, and they will come when you do the right things. All right, so thanks for the questions there. That was a great introduction to the segment, but now let's move on to something helpful. The thought just occurred to me that by saying, let's move on to something helpful, that I imply the thing we just did was not helpful. So maybe I need to say that differently, because it's like something else helpful is more but anyway, I guess all of this is intended to be helpful, and you can read that now how you want to read it, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. So as promised in the introduction, this section is going to be, like our topics have been in the past, examining the kind of stuff that we feel like, tackling interesting and complex issues around our sport. But I want to do this in a more focused way. Break it down a little bit more, chunk it more, and if we've got a big complex issue, we'll tackle it over a series of episodes instead of trying to throw it all at you at once and all the chewy stuff that is hard to swallow in one sitting or one running, whatever you're doing while you're listening. All right, so that's the idea. High impact, high value, highly focused. So tell us what you think about that in the comments or in the questions that you're sending or in conversation, because we, happen to run into each other a lot at running events and things like that, and that's always good. Okay, first up, in these next few episodes, we want to do a kind of mini series around the idea of getting started. Not necessarily just like getting started in the sport, which would be true. If you are new to the sport of running, this is a time to listen up, because we're going to help you orient around what it looks like to try to do this thing well. But even more so, potentially, I want to make a change. Where do I start? I've been doing this thing for a long time. I know everything, but your approach is less common. Where do I start there? So some of this is just like the idea of what we feel defines how runners need to orient ourselves around the sport. It's also, in some senses, a summary of our most fundamental principles here at AtoZrunning and philosophies. But as it goes, I want to try to have some very keen practical considerations. And some of this is not always, as you understand these things, the way we explain something today versus the way we explained it a year ago is not always exactly the same, because we have new experiences, new information to inform it. And so we're going to bring some of that into this, because it's been a while since we've shared some of these thoughts in a complex manner like this. And so let's do it. As mentioned, though, we're trying to keep this focused. So we're going to address the first piece of the puzzle here. And it begins with the pitfalls. Before we get into our approach and our philosophy that defines how we and why we do the things that we do here at AtoZrunning, we need to think about the pitfalls a little bit, because that kind of is what creates the need for a philosophy like this. So you could say this is the philosophy is how we approach running in general, but it tends to be the case that there are three major pitfalls that are cause for concern for runners. And those three are injury, burnout, and regret. And already, those who have been listening for a long time, our long-time listeners, your ears should perk up at that, because I just said regret. And there's a good chance that I have never said that before in this context, which is true. That might be something new. So we'll come back to that. All right, let's tackle each of these very briefly here. Injury as a pitfall for runners for decades. You've seen the studies. We've talked about them here. It's believed that 50% or more, and it's more likely more, by the way, 50% or more of runners are injured every year. So within the next 12 months, if you're not already dealing with one right now, you're going to have an injury. Chances are, flip a coin, you'll find out. Even more so, though, potentially up to or more than 25% of runners are injured at any given time. So 1 out of every 4 of you listening are hurt right now. And when we say injuries with these two statistics, we're talking specifically about disruptive injuries, things that inhibit training in some fashion or reduce it. So that's distressing. That's not pleasant and positive. But, and here's the big thing, at the same time, a high percentage of running injuries also could have been avoided or reduced. Certain behaviors as runners do substantially reduce this likelihood. And a good example of that is simply the reflection that injuries are not just a result of training too much. There's a whole lot more involved in that. Injuries aren't just a result of the things we're doing physically either. The mental and emotional activities of our life influence these types of things too. So, because of that, we need a philosophy that addresses this pitfall, all three of these pitfalls, as it were. So, the question that, the rhetorical question, do you want to be injured less and less severely when you are? And the answer, of course, is yes. Well, let's think about some things we can do. We'll come back to that. Next up is burnout. Burnout is not as quite well researched as injuries, running injuries, for many reasons. One, namely among them, because it's very difficult to measure something like burnout as clearly. But anecdotally, at the very least, it is very common. And not just in a broad sense, like I'm burnt out with the sport forever and I'm done, but like in a microcosm of I'm burnt out right now and I just need to take a step back for a bit. Or today, I'm feeling that and I need it. So exhausted, unmotivated, often is connected to injury and illness. Often as well related to things like an obligatory sense. I'm not doing this because I like it or because I enjoy it, but because I feel like I've got to do it for some reason. Nearly every runner self-reports a desire for longevity in the sport. But do we actually know how to direct our efforts in a way that produce long-term, not only success, but enjoyment just within the sport? So how do we do that? How do we direct those efforts accordingly? Third pitfall is regret. And this is the doing things I wish I hadn't, or not doing things I wish I had. And those who study the topic, by the way, and there's a really interesting writing on the topic from Daniel Pink. Again, I've said this before, I don't know exactly what the story is behind this, if it's currently available in its full published state or not, but I know he's been writing about it for some time. And so Daniel Pink, among many others, assert that our personality actually has a lot to do with which direction we lean in terms of regret. The risk takers tend to do things and then later wish they hadn't, and the more safe-minded people tend to not do things and then later on wish they had. But whatever the case may be, it's all retrospective. This is all me thinking after the fact, well, that wasn't the right thing, or that wasn't the best thing. Wouldn't it be nice to not make regrettable choices? Wouldn't it be great to hold priorities and proper perspective at all times and just never feel badly about the choices we make? Now, of course, I can't promise that. No one can promise that. But there are things, when we approach the sport, we think about this and we think, you know what? We should be approaching this as runners in a way that is less regrettable, insofar as such things can be the case. So those are the pitfalls. We feel like that summarizes all the major things that go wrong in the running experience. And there's more involved in each one of those than what I just said as well, to try to help capture the nuance. But Again, this is kind of a focused rendition here, and we can go into the pitfalls and more specific addressing them another time. Now, what we then say is we need a response to these pitfalls, a response that captures the scope of what we should be doing as runners and how we should go about doing it so that we can achieve our desired goals. And we summarize those desired goals with the word thriving. The reason why we always say that is because we think it is more important for a person who is a runner to be a thriving human than it is to be, for instance, a fast runner. Arguably, those two can go together most of the time. They don't have to, and they won't always. But if that's true, we feel that the thing we do for you here at AtoZrunning should help you thrive, not just make you faster, or not just, fill in the blanks, right? Now, that, of course, is then dependent on you as well as us. You need to actually want us to be offering things that contribute to your general thriving. I think that that's probably a safe bet. But in any instance, it helps inform then what's most important to us. And that's where we call them our running foundations. And you've heard us say this before. If you go back, if you want to listen to the in-depth examination of these as we did them on the podcast, some time ago now, is episodes 39, 40, and 41. We did a separate episode on each of the foundations. And if we were to do them all again right now, chances are we wouldn't say all the exact same things, and we would add some other considerations because, as I mentioned, since then, however many years ago that was, we have had new experiences. We have read more literature on the sport, and we have spoken with more runners in the world. And all of those things contribute, among others, to nuances in our thinking. But the core remains the same. Our 3 keys to thriving that define our coaching and training services, that define our messages here, that define our efforts in AtoZrunning as an organization, as well as interpersonally when we're just runners being and doing the things that runners are and do. The 3 keys to thriving are channel the energy, strengthen the animal, and raise the roof, which none of those are self-evident just by the words, so let's explain them briefly. Channel the energy is the most important, and we have in the past always said this third because it's the least obvious or practical, but it's the most important of the 3. So I need to start saying it first. So I'm going to do that. Channeling the energy is about directing our efforts and priorities in and out of training. It's about life balance. It's about finding the right kind of harmony and understanding the place that running fills in our lives. Because we're talking from the perspective of runners here. The answer to the question can also be no running. It's possible that for people to thrive, that they would say, I should not be a runner. And we understand that that is a possible answer to the question. And if our efforts lead people to that answer at some point or another, and their lives are better for it, that's great. That is fulfilling the mission. And so I'm not going to complain about it. But I don't expect that most people are listening to this as seeking a way out of the sport. Either way, we think that that's the end goal. So life priorities, balances, and the idea of directing our efforts, even in training as well. Exertion is the key. How do we exert ourselves, our life limits of energy, which we talk about all the time. Energy is a finite thing, right? There is only so much of it, and it's measurable in a couple of different ways, but there's only so much energy in a day. There's only so much energy in a moment. Like I can only do so much in any given moment in time. Can only give of myself so much before there's I'm just out of it. I'm empty, right? And as well, if you were to then create a kind of like for your whole life, it's true that there is a limit of, eventually my life runs out of energy. Now we do not argue that that should be the focal point, because we also believe very thoroughly that there are sources of renewed energy, many of them in life, and they take many forms and fashions, and different people renew in different ways, introverts versus extroverts, for one example. But the case is made here that we need to be diligent about how we are directing our energies to achieve the best ends. How much, how often, and for how long do we exert ourselves? and the implications for training are clear here. Running does not happen in isolation, by the way, always a side caveat, which means that the types of things we do in training also have to be informed by the rest of life. How much I exert, how often, and for how long should not just be dependent on how I'm feeling physically when I go out for a run, but it should also be dependent on everything that surrounds it in my life, priorities, in my life, balance. And the idea here, it's important to be agile and adaptable as runners, because as we direct our efforts, they need to be responsive to what is possible in a given moment and what we need in a given moment, and the best course of action to achieve that. So the nugget here, and I did want to, for practical purposes, want to give at least one clear, actionable nugget with each of these three. The first one here, Barry McGee says, he calls it train, don't strain. Barry McGee is the New Zealand, the Kiwi runner who was in the 1960 Olympics, was the bronze medalist in the marathon. He was my coach for a number of years, and as well has coached many runners across all levels. His coaching repertoire might be one of the most expansive of just about anyone in the history of coaching, by the way. And I don't say that to exaggerate. It's very possible that Barry McGee has coached more levels of runners and more in volume runners than just about any other individual coach ever. Because at 90 years old, he's still coaching. That's saying something. He's not just coaching like a handful of people. All right, so Barry McGee says, train, don't strain. Now, similarly, our advice to runners, the way we tend to frame it is don't reach for it. Meaning don't reach beyond what is reasonably attainable in the moment. So whether it's today's workout or your life schedule and busyness, stay within what is reasonable. Overextending ourselves more often harms us than helps us. Whether that's an effort on a run, whether that's trying to juggle the life busyness or all the other stuff. So channel the energy well by staying within what is reasonable in pretty much everything is the way we tend to. And of course, people are going to say things like, yeah, but if you don't take big risks, you don't get big rewards. And that has some merit in like broad senses. But that's not a good training approach. It's actually terrible. It's a terrible training approach. Big risks in training are never a good idea. So don't take them. All right. Okay. There's other nuances. These are nuanced ideas, and we're just trying to hit them in the face as squarely as possible for a quick look. Number 2, strengthen the animal. This quote specifically, or line, was stolen from a great moment with one of the great coaches, Dave Hodgkinson, when he was advising Andy in her primary years as a runner, in her formative years. He was suggesting to her some things she needed to do, and one of them was to strengthen the animal, or become a stronger animal, as he put it. So what we mean by this, be stronger, be more mobile, and more deliberate in our strength and mobility and our movement as runners. We need to excel at the thing that we are doing as runners. We need to be able to do it well. Because it's going to be better for us if we do. We get injured less. We get more from training. We feel better when we're running. And so it's just like all around. It's a good thing. So the nugget here is simple. 10 to 15 minutes per day of strength work, specifically aligned with sound functional movement for running. And so that means like doing that little bit of extra stuff can produce serious results. But the one key to achieving those serious results is to be deliberate, like do the things well. And I say it that way because as someone who has coached middle school, high school, college, and adult runners, I see the same thing in all levels at any given time. I see this quite readily, which is you've got people who are doing the compliant thing. Like I'm doing it because I'm doing it. But I don't necessarily know if I'm doing it well, and I don't necessarily care to try to figure that out. Or I do care to try to figure it out, but I don't know how to or where to start. And the end result is I'm doing the thing, but it might not be doing for me what it should be because of the way I'm doing it. So pursue deliberate, like diligent execution of the strength work, and it's going to have that much greater of an impact. And if you're not sure, because, there's a lot to be said about, you can find this stuff on Instagram and YouTube and everything, and all these people showing all this stuff, but they don't always tell you what you should be doing when you're doing it to make sure you execute properly. So that's a good question to ask. Throw it on the AtoZrunning.com/question sometime, and we'll answer it. Every week, we're answering your questions. Number 3, the last one here, is raise the roof. And what we mean by this is we're talking about aerobic capacity. All running beyond the sprint distances lives and dies by aerobic development. This defines your fitness gains. It predicts your physiological capacity. Your aerobic development is the thing that means you're a better runner than you were before. Now, there's a lot more involved in how we could explain that, but the principal point is how your energy system operates defines how well you engage physiologically with the activity. And so aerobic system can only be adequately developed with a strong musculoskeletal system present. And so what it means here is that this development, for my energy system to do what it needs to do, it needs a structure that is functionally sound and responsive to the demands. So I need to have a strong skeleton and muscles. And so build yourself up and take your time doing it. And that means that building up that musculoskeletal resilience as the primary goal, not as a thing you do incidentally through the training process, but do that with deliberate focus. And that's, just putting in the time and not overdoing it with my efforts, but just putting in the time and stay as easy as I can and need to, so I can get in some proper volumes and loads of running. And then as you do that extra strength work we mentioned in the strength in the animal piece, then what we're able to do in terms of gains achieved by our aerobic work is going to be substantially more. And it should be noted at the same time, most of us don't necessarily fully understand how to effectively train our aerobic system. We tend to be running too hard on hard days, and we tend to be running not easy enough on easy days. And all of it suggests that we tend to be coercive in training as runners, and we need to not do that. Back to our previous point. It's best to cajole our energy system to progress rather than to coerce it. And so that is how we approach training our systems. So in summary, as I said, focused is the intent here. We're convinced that when runners adopt these kinds of things, these 3 keys to thriving are foundations, which, by the way, as I should always say, these are entirely unoriginal ideas. I even cited for you a number of the sources right there. Everybody, including you listening, are doing the things that we're just describing in various capacities, and much of it quite deliberately. But we're trying to put the package together in a way that is repeatable, that is incrementally repeatable for all runners. So this kind of stuff, we're talking about less injury, less burnout, less regret by channeling our energy better, by strengthening the animal that is our physical capacity, and by raising the roof that is our energy system and what it can produce. And we're going to enjoy the sport better and longer. We're going to perform at a higher level. We're going to feel good about the ordering of running and its place in the rest of our lives. And so what follows from this then is this premise is that we realize that even things like the way we train and how we use training measures and metrics and how we approach what decisions we make about how we and when we engage with training, all that kind of stuff should reinforce these principles, should be informed by these principles. And that means for us here at AtoZrunning, a number of things that we did as runners, we do differently now. And a number of things that we recommended as coaches, we recommend differently now, having brought about clarity on these kinds of priorities for us, at least here at AtoZrunning. So we've got these philosophies and approaches that are going to define basically everything else that we do, and how we recommend the things we recommend. And you're going to see flavors of that here in the next couple episodes when we get into some other considerations. But also you're going to notice that in everything. And it doesn't mean it's something we're deliberately trying to connect the dots. It's just going to happen because that's the way this kind of thing works. But because it's time to get to the next segment, then I think we've addressed the topic enough for now to give you something to think about, and we'll come back to it more later. So for now, let's get on to the world of running. As we have done and we will continue to do, we like to share some updates about our group, the A to Z runners that we support and the things that they're doing. And it's because it's running news, it fits well with this segment. So a couple updates here. Mary won the 10K at the Red Flannel Festival. Well done, Mary. She's been placing well in races all fall and summer. This is quite the season for you there, Mary. Excellent. Chelsea ran a half marathon in the New Belgium half marathon. Well done, Chelsea. Laura also ran a half at Fort for Fitness, and Lorenda ran a sizable 5K PR at the Calvin Classic. Always exciting when we see personal best performances as runners. So congrats, Lorenda, and everybody else who competed in the various events here. All right, now let's zoom out to the rest of the world and talk about the World Athletics Road Running Championships. I teased. I don't know if that's quite the right word. It was a kind of teaser. I teased our World of Running topics rather is what I'm looking for. I teased them in the introduction, and if it's been a while since that introduction, so you may have forgotten some of the things I mentioned, but there's some really interesting stuff going on here, and so we'll always kind of give you a heads up about that at the beginning and then come back to it here in this segment. Now, at the World Athletics Road Running Championships, you have some new things going on here because the World Athletics has done some road championships over the years. Like the marathon is always a part of the track and field championships, but they also have a world half marathon championship that they've done sometimes. It's not there's not been a lot of them, but what they did now is they kind of have like a festival approach, and so there are 3 events at this year's World Athletics Road Running Championships, a kind of inaugural event here, and maybe, hopefully, something that they continue doing. The first one up is the mile. And so this is a road mile, which is one that it's a lot of fun because it's just a little bit different. You get the milers who race well on the track, but the road is a little bit different, and so you get some different things happening. It's always fun. Also, if you recall, we shared last week that they just added the mile as an official record event acknowledged by World Athletics. That doesn't mean people haven't had like fastest mile on the roads in the world. They have, but it has not been an official record that was kept. And so now that it is, all of the times people ran before don't count. Well, they do, but they don't count for this one. So basically everyone's just running. Every time there's a mile race, there's a new world record, which is kind of fun, but also a little bit silly. Well, as it goes, in the road mile here, the men's race was interesting because you have, on the women's race, we'll share in a moment, basically like the who's who of international milers. 4 of the top 7 finishers from the 1500 in the World Championships on track came and ran it. So like the best milers in the history of time basically were running in the women's race. And the men's race, like none of them came to this one. None of the track milers who were finishing in the top spots, which is not, I'm not at all belittling the performances of those who did run it, but it's just interesting that you just have such a discrepancy between the men's and the women's in that sense. But as a result, you get some fresh faces, which is always fun for me. I like to kind of see, look at these people that I haven't necessarily seen race before in these kinds of settings. So in the men's race, it was very tight. Which suggests then that, as milers like to do, it's just kind of a sit and kick affair, and you get the point with road mile that you can have more people in the race, and so you get even more contenders for the sit and kick situation, which in my mind just makes it that much worse of an idea because every miler thinks he's got the best kick, and only one of them's right in any given moment. But with 200 meters to go, there were still 10 men in the race, like head to head to head. I mean, they're spread out because it's a road, not like a track where you got to really hug the inside lane, right? So that being the case, I think if I recall the course, they had like 3 turns. So mostly straight lines as well, which meant for a lot of opportunity for people to spread out more and get around each other. As this happens to be the case, Hobbs Kessler of the United States wins the men's mile in this crazy tight finish. and Callum Ellison of Great Britain in a very tight second. Sam Prakel of the USA in a close third. So Hobbs Kessler wins the inaugural World Athletics Road Mile Championships, which is always fun. But also, as I mentioned with the world record situation, being that this is only the second time there's been a road mile held since they announced the record, he also broke the world record. So congrats, Hobbs Kessler. This is now your first international title, as well as your first world record. And that's always a fun and exciting moment, which means Hobbs Kessler's post-race reaction was perfect because, he wins the race. And so he's just like, he's ecstatic. And it's funny. You got to see this video. It's just fun. It's fun to watch him after the race. But then he notices that, like, they hold up the thing next to him that says world record, right? And he looks at it and he's like, oh, yeah. And he gets really excited again. Oh, it's just fun. Fun stuff for Hobbs Kessler. Also, it should be noted that part of his excitement, I have no doubt, is because not only do you win $10,000 for winning the race, which is something at least, also there's an additional $50,000 for getting a world record, which, as mentioned, in this race was incidental. Whoever won this race was going to get that world record. And so Hobbs Kessler won an unexpected $50,000 bonus after another $10,000 for winning the race, which means taking home $60,000. His comment afterwards was, finally, I can now buy furniture for my home. And I think to myself, in how many sports in the world today would some of the very best in the sport, professionals, winning a world championship event, say, with the prize money here that I just got, I can buy furniture? I think in most sports, the answer would be, I can buy 2 new homes or 7 new cars. But instead, in running, we don't really have that opportunity. So I lament. But Hobbs Kessler, congrats. Big win. Very exciting. And Elson, Great Britain, and Prakel from the USA, well done to round out the top 3. By the way, I should note that Sam Prakel was the previous world record holder in that event. Remember how we mentioned that he was the first one to run a road mile win a road mile since they announced the record. So Sam Prakel, he lost his record only like a week after he said it. But, that's going to happen in a situation like that. All right, women's race. I mentioned strong field, super strong field. 4 of the top 7 finishers from the World Championship Track and Field 1500, which means world record holder Faith Kipyegon was there from Kenya, as well as silver medalist Deribe Welteji from Ethiopia, among others. Now, here's what's crazy. Faith Kipyegon has not only won every single race she's run in like 4 years, she's lost 1 time. And I think this is true. 1 loss in 4 years. But Faith Kipyegon wins everything. She's also set 3 world records this year. And yet, she barely finished 3rd in the road mile because, the roads change things. It's not the same, and that just makes it fun. It was Welteji of Ethiopia who took the title this time in, yes, a new world record road time of 4:20, just a hair under 4:21, and Welteji beating the previous record by 7 seconds. So that, as mentioned before, is kind of the way it's going to happen for a bit here, but still a very strong time there from Welteji, winning herself that coveted $50,000 bonus in addition to the 10 for the victory as well. That's exciting stuff. And it was Frewani Hailu of Ethiopia who finished 2nd, and then Faith Kipyegon of Kenya in 3rd. Now, let's talk about the half marathon at the World Road Championships. Half marathon is an event that they've held at a road championship of some capacity over the years, and so it's definitely one that is more familiar, but as it goes, the half marathon is one of the more brutal races out there. These people run this so stinking fast, and it's gotta hurt to run that fast for that long. But in this instance, it was Kenya who showed up big, both sweeping the men's 1, 2, and 3 and the women's races for the top 3 places. Very, very impressive. On the women's side, it was Perez Jepchirchir who took the title. She is not strange to winning road championships and road marathon masters races, among other things. So in a strong 67 minutes and 25 seconds, an hour 7, she wins. I believe this is her 3rd half marathon championship as well, winning 2016, 2020, and 2023. And then you can see the track record there. Those are not like back-to-back-to-back types of things. She's been doing this at a high level for a long time. No stranger to winning. Came down to a kick with runner-up, by the way, and it was Margaret Kipkemboy who finished second behind Chepchirchir. Close finish, very exciting. Molly Grable, by the way, of the USA, was the top USA finisher. For those who are watching those types of things, she finished 13th in just under 70 minutes, or 70 seconds. 70 minutes, an hour and 10 minutes. Thank you. And a personal best, which is always exciting. On the men's side, as mentioned, Kenya swept it. It was Sebastian Sawe over Daniel Ebenyo for gold. Sawe passing Ebenyo in the final, I don't know, quarter-ish mile or less, and they saluted each other. It was kind of funny. It almost looked like Ebenyo was like granting Sawe the victory, like, good job, you won it off me, or you took it from me or something, because Ebenyo had no response. When Sawe went past him, it was over. But they finished very amiably, and then Kenya coming in behind him in third to take the countryman sweep is always really exciting stuff. By the way, it was Bia Simbasa for the United States who had the top finish back in 25th place, which tells you how competitive this thing was, because he was 25th in 61 minutes, 28 seconds, and Sawe won the race in 59:10. So not even 2.5 minutes behind, and there's a whole bunch of guys in the mix between them. Sawe, by the way, just like Chepchirchir on the women's side, is no stranger to winning half marathons and not necessarily road championships, but this is his 5th half marathon victory in 6 races. So he's got it down. He's doing well. All right, now the third and final event at the World Road Championship was the 5K. And remember that if you say it on a track, it's 5,000 meters. If you say it on a road, it's 5 kilometers. That's just the way it goes. And in the women's 5K, it was a tight one. 7 women together through 3K, and it was world 10,000 meter track bronze medalist Ejgayehu Taye, of Ethiopia, who was trying to break it all up, trying to change it all up, and made a mess of everybody in the race and kind of split everybody apart. Very bold tactics in the early stages of the race, but Beatrice Chebet of Kenya overtook her in the final stages to win the race in 14:35, which is moving on the roads very fast. And Lillian Rangaruk of Kenya ended up grabbing Taye just before the line to finish second. So Kenya took 1-2 and Ethiopia third in Taye. In the men's race, 5K is one of those races we have just enjoyed watching immensely on the track this year, because it's just been crazy how fast these guys have been running and how competitive it's been. And many familiar faces here, as were in the track races this recent season. So Yamif Kejelcha of Ethiopia led most of the race. He does that quite a bit and likes to run near the front. But by 3K, it was he and countryman Hagos Gebruet who basically had gapped the field. And so then late in the race, Kejelcha hammered it to try to shake off Gebruet, but couldn't manage it. Gebruet ended up overtaking him. Very late surge to win in 12:59, just under 13 minutes. On the roads, that's moving. That is something. And then it was Nicholas Kipkorir of Kenya in a distant third place behind the Ethiopians. All right. World Road Championships, really interesting stuff. There's videos out there. You can see some of it, and so it's really kind of fun to watch people running that fast on the roads. It's really interesting. Now, next up here, I mentioned in the introduction the Twin Cities. Well, I didn't mention the Twin Cities, but I mentioned a marathon that was canceled. It was the Twin Cities Marathon in Minnesota, and the 10-mile race were canceled. But here's the thing. So they warned, 3 days before the race, they warned participants in a note that if conditions were bad enough, they would cancel. And it was kind of like, we've set a line. If they're any worse than this line, that's it. We're calling it, no matter when it happens. Well, they didn't specify exactly what that line was, so participants didn't have a very clear sense of whether things were likely to be canceled or not until they got to the race and exactly 2 hours before the start of the event. 2 hours, people. They canceled the race. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So no answers yet, by the way, as of when I'm recording this, about refunds or what they're going to do with that. which means that if they don't have immediate answers ready there, then it's probably because they were really just hoping to not have to refund people and are looking at their policy to see if it was abundantly clear in their policy that they wouldn't refund you if it's bad weather, so that they can just stick to the policy and say sorry. That's me being cynical, sorry. But I mean, really, why wouldn't they have an immediate answer? Because they're trying to figure it out, which is not a good sign. And ultimately, my take here on something like this, first, I don't philosophically agree with the mindset that someone else needs to decide how much risk I should be taking as a runner. So if the conditions are bad and I still want to run in it, why can't I? Because I could anyway. I could just go for a 26-mile run there anyway. So what does it matter whether, so the race certainly, should do everything they can to inform people about what the conditions mean and how best to address that, and also to provide the stuff on the course, which, by the way, is a piece of the puzzle. There's a good chance in some of these situations races think, we don't have enough to handle, we don't have enough stuff to handle that much heat, and so we need to cancel. I don't know the reasons exactly, but I do know that you should let us race if we want to race. And if someone chooses to do so, I take, ownership of my choice and its outcomes. However, not everybody agrees with me on that, and I understand that too. I just think, there's a little bit to be said about canceling the race 2 hours before when everyone's already there at the race and called it. Okay, that happened, and I am sorry for anyone listening who was there and planning to run it. That's a major bummer, and I do hope they refund you and give you a free entry to the next one, although if I were you, I wouldn't likely do that one again, but find a different one for the next one. All right. Very strange situation in India. And I'm going to wrap it up with this one because this is crazy. Reported initially, I found this in InsideTheGames.biz, also reported by NPR and a number of other outlets. Here's what it is. The Delhi State Athletics Championships, held in New Delhi, India. It's a youth up to adult event. And apparently it was announced, or maybe not announced. It wasn't announced. Apparently it was determined that the World Anti-Doping Agency wanted a little bit more representation at the meet, or actually some, because apparently there wasn't any. So they sent agents, made a surprise visit, unannounced, to confirm athlete ages. That's one thing they were doing there. And spot testing, drug testing, which they do randomly as well as to like the top finishers. That's pretty common practice. At most major events, if you finish in the top places, they're going to drug test you right there on the spot. And they won't let you leave until you've submitted the drug test. And they'll often just spot test others as well. So that happened. Well, when they showed up, the agents, to perform these tests and confirmations, things got crazy. First, in the boys 100-meter final, 7 of 8 participants didn't even show up. So the final was about to go off, the 100-meter, and there's only one person there to run it. They didn't even come because, they don't want to get caught. That's the only reason, right? They don't want to get caught. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know if it's an age thing, if it's a drug thing. I don't know, but they didn't even show. Another instance, a girl running the steeplechase after finishing the race just kept on running to get away from the officials and get out of there before they could stop her, which is just mind-boggling. I don't know if that works either. I don't know if they just catch up to you later or they just wait till you come back, or maybe she never came back. I don't know. But that's what she did. And then the last note here that I'll share, and this one's just a little bit unsettling and maybe somewhat unbelievable. An on-site reporter shared a video via like Twitter or X, whatever it's called now. And this video is of a bathroom that's completely cluttered with used syringes. Like, they're everywhere. And this video is unsettling. Don't watch it if this kind of stuff grosses you out. We're talking like piles of used syringes in the corners, in the sinks, and like they're just everywhere. And so I watched that and I think, I don't know. I don't know if that's believable or legitimate. That seems a bit sensational to me. But I also have no way to know one way or the other. So we saw the video. NPR posted it saying it appears to be the case. Allegedly, this was from one of the bathrooms at the track meet later in the meet, and it looks like athletes are injecting stuff before their competitions, after their competitions, who knows. So two things here. First, this is terribly sad. It's incredibly sad because it speaks of desperation for these athletes. The idea that they might be drug tested and they're going to skip out on their races. They're, like, clearly there's a lot of shenanigans happening in a situation like this to produce that kind of situation, and that is sad. Also, though, it makes me think that the incentive structure in this scenario like this must be broken as well, because for people to engage at that level with these kinds of things begs the question, why is it worth it? So NPR reports that youth are especially incentivized in this kind of sense because performance at a high enough level at that moment in time, like as a youth, not only means a cash prize and possible like college scholarship and stuff, but also the likelihood of like government jobs. Future security is the answer here, and that is not a good, like. So the idea is, if you run fast, then we'll set you up. But if you don't run fast, we're not going to pay any attention to you. I don't love that as the that's the thing that matters and nothing else. That's disheartening to me. But it also is reminiscent of a recent story we shared here in the United States, where the top record-setting sprinter, but I believe the top male sprinter of all time in preparatory high school level in the United States, was just caught doping as a high schooler. And I think to myself, what are you doing in your mind that makes you think this is worth it? and that happening so rampantly in the situation at the New Delhi meet there. So that's rough stuff, and that's about all I have to report on it, which means it kind of ending rather on a sad note, and I don't want to do that. So to lift it up at least a bit, thank you for over 4 years and counting of your support and listenership here at AtoZrunning, and we are so grateful for that, and just thrilled that at the experience of being able to interact with, engage with you and you all, and we just want more of it. And so maybe we're greedy here at AtoZrunning because it's not enough. We want more from you. We want your comments and your questions, and we want your interactions so that the thing we're talking about can be that much closer to the thing that you're thinking about. So hit us up on Instagram, YouTube, or Spotify, or the other places where you can interact. And as always, go to AtoZrunning.com/question, and you can share comments and questions there also. And then we'll engage back. And that's what we do, and that's what we love to do here. So with that, thank you for joining us at the beginning of Season 5. We look forward to many more. And it starts with talking to you again next week.